to the Grind to Growth to Greatness podcast. The best and brightest entrepreneurs, CEOs, creators, athletes. We'll talk to them all, and we'll get the good, the bad, and the ugly on how they made it. Decoding the secrets of success. Grind to Growth to Greatness podcast. Unveiling the paths to success. And now your host, Terry Barr.
So I want to welcome you into our next episode of Grind to Growth to Greatness. We have a fantastic local leader. I won't call her local because that's how I know her, but she has a couple different venues, one here and one in Nashville. And she is not only a female leader in our area, she's just a leader in general. And I've watched her and known her for quite a long time. So I'm very, very happy to have her on. She's got an interesting story, how she got from where she was to where she is. And we're going to hear a little bit about that. Her name is Deeter Gallaher of Deeter Gallaher Group here in Camp Hill. She owns a PR firm. I think it's much more than that. She's co-author of a couple books, Women in High Gear. She's a Camp Hill native. She's married to her husband, Corey, and she has 3 boys, and they are Benjamin, Aaron, and Joshua. So I want to welcome in Deeter Gallaher to our podcast this week. Welcome.
Terry, thank you very much. That's quite an intro. You've done your research.
Well, we try to know what we're doing.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have you in. Like I said, I would say we're acquaintances. We've known each other for a long time, but she has a very successful business here in town. So we wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit and get the grip behind the grind, the underlying story of how she got here. She started your business when you were 40.
Yes.
Right. But there's a lot before that, right?
Yes. I don't really have the typical trajectory to entrepreneurship or women business ownership, which kind of, I think, is my angle. It's one of the reasons I wrote Women in High Gear is because I couldn't find the information I was looking at. And, part of I was scanning all your podcast questions. I love them all. And when you talked at the very end about, is it passion or purpose? Both, I'm going to say. And it's one of the reasons why I was so invested in Women in High Gear, because I needed to shorten my learning curve. And after, doing my own research and finding out how to burst onto the business scene, if you would, I figured a lot of women, especially younger, aspiring women, could benefit from the lessons Amy Howe and I had learned.
Yeah. So a couple of things in there. I mean, that's one of my big questions is the passion versus purpose. Which comes first? Can you have one without the other? I think a lot of kids in our day and age, they're saying, hey, find something passionate, do that. Be passionate about something. But if you're passionate about something without purpose, sometimes that can be empty. And so I think it's interesting that you mentioned that right off the top. I think if you have purpose in something and you're passionate about it, it works out really good.
Right. And you can be profitable.
Right.
That's the other P.
I'm going to add that to my question. You have to have that, right? But just like you said, you were passionate about it. And there was a line in your book that kind of goes to that. It says, if your ship doesn't come in, swim to it.
And I have that in my office. It's a Jonathan Winters. I'm totally dating myself by talking about, he's a longtime comedian, decades ago. Yeah. But when I read that, and you rightly mentioned it, it's in the book. When I started at age 40, I didn't have 25 years to figure it out.
Right.
So when you start your business at 25, you can afford some twists and turns, and maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe it does work out. Maybe you didn't connect with the right people, or maybe you're unsure how to network. I almost had a quiet sense of urgency about if I was going to start a business and I'm going to be away from my 3 sons and my husband, it needed to be purposeful. I needed to be passionate, and it had to be profitable. And so, a lot of younger people, passion project is a big term now that, especially post-COVID of, they want to do something, they're going to do something on the side and they want to grow it into a business, which is a great way to start as an entrepreneur, but it's going to be a hobby unless you can find a path to revenue.
And I think that's specific to women, what you just said that about, at 40, I didn't have time to
figure it
out because you had 3 kids.
Right.
And in your book, I know you talked about, there's women are always forced to ask the question, should I stay home? Should I go to work? And you made the conscious decision, we're going to try to make this work. I want to stay home. You can't buy time back with your kids.
Right. No do-overs.
Yeah, no do-overs. I read that. And so that was interesting during that period of time that you were going through. I know you were a mom, but you were also very invested in PTA and community and very aware of that. And you're still that way. So tell me, why was that important in your journey there as you went through parenthood, motherhood, if you will, before you got to opening your business?
Well, I always, if you're raising children, you really want to have a purpose. You want to share that purpose with them. You want to be the guide and the nurturer and the support system for them as they grow. And so doing that, and just almost by default, as they were in wrestling and baseball and sports, we would be there. We would either be working concession stands or, they were all in Boy Scouts. So for 7 years, I put on the uniform and did the, Cub Scout leader because I was going to do it along with them. We were invested. It was important to us as a family. And so that's really where the community, of course, all the school, support system that you become. And as a stay-at-home mom, I was able to work my schedule around that. So then when I hit 40 and realized I really want to try this business ownership thing, and you probably written a book with zero business education. My degree, I have a bachelor's, it is not in business.
Yes.
We did not have entrepreneurship at Shippensburg University at the time.
Right.
I took one econ 101, because I guess it was a requirement, because I can't think I would have volunteered for that. And Emil Bay, B-E-J was the professor's name. I remember it. And I didn't really love it.
Yeah.
It doesn't come naturally to me, but there was no path to that. There wasn't even in my game plan. So I'm sure my family was shocked when I said, I want to try this.
So part of your past, your vocational past, you did some work for a nonprofit, correct?
Right.
And then you were part of a publishing company, is that right?
Mm-hmm. So
during those periods of time, did that give you kind of a direction so that when you said, hey, I want to try this business owner thing, I really want to dive into this, did you already know kind of where you wanted to go with that?
I end up in the minority in a lot of situations.
Okay.
So whether it's I'm doing things atypical and not on a standard path, but my degree is in journalism, communications, public relations. So those three. I added on a bachelor's in English at the end. I realized if you could do, 19 credits, 21 credits, I could finish with 2 bachelors, not a minor, in case I wanted to teach. So I stayed in my skill set, if you would.
Okay.
That was my training. So my challenge in coming to business was the art of business, not the skills of, professional writing, journalism, media relations, public relations. I have had a handle on that and still do, fortunately have a handle on that. It was, how do you burst onto a business scene? And I joined the West Shore Chamber of Commerce. That was the very first thing I did, which I think is where I first met you.
Probably, yes.
Decades ago.
Yes.
And again, I felt like it was, I talked about this in my podcast, Dr. Seuss, Are You My Mother? Like, is this where I come to do business? Is this what you do? And I looked at the big, they had a wall of business cards. And I thought, oh, okay, I need a business card. I need a logo. Yeah. I need to do this thing.
At the rudimentary.
Yes.
You were figuring that out. Okay.
And so I remember both of my brothers are and were business owners in Philadelphia. So they're in, the big city. They're both older. And I can remember distinctly almost a laughter when I was just exuding this excitement. This is what I've done. It's 2000. We're gonna do this. And my brother Philip said, Ann, have you just heard of a Chamber of Commerce? I said, kind of, I have.
I've been
doing, yes.
I'm in the family CEO, I think.
So, exactly. So my encouragement to any younger women who are listening to your podcast, and I'm sure you have a lot, is all of my community service, if you would, everything I was passionate about and volunteered for, I leveraged into the workplace. Yeah. So if you are, take it back to a basic level, I ran Vacation Bible School for several years at our church, a relatively smaller to mid-sized church. if you can get, say, 50 parents to come out in June for 5 nights in a row from 5 to 9, you can have meetings ahead of time and you're going to persuade them to do this and explain why it's good to pour yourself into children, other people's children. You have persuasion skills.
Yeah.
If you can get 3 boys to bed on time, you have negotiating skills. So those are all skills or soft skills that you need to succeed in business. But they were all non-billable.
Yeah.
So my challenge was, how do I bill for those?
Turn that into billing.
How do I leverage those to start a business? So I was fully raised my hand, like, I don't know how to start a business.
Wow.
So did a lot of research. And this is when just getting a home computer was a big deal. This is floppy disk time. Sure. So this is...
Absolutely.
But anyway, the good news is, there's certainly tons of opportunities. There's tons of help along the way. I had a personal board of advisors. I think that was one of your questions about mentors. It doesn't have to be a formal relationship, but the good news is there are a ton of people in leadership that are happy to help younger people who aspire to business ownership.
Well, I agree with that. And I know a couple of leaders that you were talking about was, CEO Ford, kind of, I think that was one of the people that you had
an early client, one of the first clients.
Yeah. And then
Patty Husick, one of the early client.
Centric Bank.
Started and founded, a bank in 2007. So anyone who has done any history, that's a bad time to start a bank.
Here.
Yes.
And then there was a Derek.
Oh yeah, Hathaway. Yes.
You mentioned that as well.
Yes.
So a lot of people, including myself, when I started this, I started with an idea. Here's what I want to do, and here's the problem I see, and the problem I want to solve, or the service that I want to give to the community. It sounds like you kind of started with your skill sets, hard skill sets, soft skill sets, and said, okay, I've got my education. Here's what it's in. I have my set of skill sets, and you talked about, negotiating with your kids and so on and so forth. How can I wrap myself around something that fulfills that as a service? I mean, is that true, or did you have in mind, you know what? I think I'd like to open a PR firm.
Well, it's kind of a combination.
Okay.
So I saw, which I encourage all people who want to start a business, what problem are you solving? You could be very passionate about, owning a restaurant, but if there are 10 other restaurants in, 20-mile radius, probably the deck is stacked against you. So do some research. What would your restaurant, be like? So right out of college, Monday after college, I started at a denominational publishing house in the editorial department.
Right.
Worked my way up to director of editorial. So after 5 years, then I realized, okay, I think we would like to start a family. My first negotiating with them to keep me part-time. So it was remote work before this is ever. So this
was 1986.
Yes. Yeah. So that's not even heard of, let alone women would ask, especially in a denominational publishing house like that. Just was never done, ever done. So I went and negotiated. They had already invested a lot of money in me. Did they want to waste that, or didn't they want to tap into that?
Pretty good pitch.
I did have a pitch, and they said yes. It hadn't been done before, but that has never dissuaded me. Actually, I think that's even better. I like to be the first doing something.
Sure.
So they said yes. So for 15 years, I worked for them part-time. I came in the office for bigger meetings, but did editing that whole time and built it around my schedule. One son became 2 sons, became 3 sons. But that allowed me to go to wrestling matches and to be at baseball games and to volunteer without asking permission. And that's why I was really shying away from that. So my brother-in-law, who's a pastor and professor at Messiah and Wesley Theological Seminary, I was listening to him preach one time, and he had a youth ministry that he had started called Salt and Light. So my very first job as Deeter Gallaher Marketing Communications. So that's what, and I have that.
I like it.
That was my first business card.
Okay.
Was for him, which was a nonprofit, because all these young people were sharing fabulous stories and they needed sponsors for the ministry. And I said, well, how are you getting your word out? So that was my first paid gig. Yeah, for marketing them and really bringing in a graphic designer, meeting the first printers that I would work with on taking it from what I'd like to say, think to build. Yeah. So the whole product they needed. Yeah. So my first work with them won a nice national award. So I thought, okay, I think I could do this.
I did it once very well.
I know. So here we are 24 years later, and it's good to bet on yourself.
Yeah. So I've had, it's interesting. I've done about 8 or 9 of these so far. And out of the 8 or 9, probably a little more than half have been women.
Okay.
And it's interesting because I asked the question and with all due respect, and I had Sue Para on.
Yeah. Love her. Love her.
Week, had a great conversation. You and I are similar in age. And in 1986, being not only in a ministry-driven publishing company, but also that period of time, what were some of the struggles that you had being a woman in America that seems like they always have just a little extra they've got to go, or they've got to go over one more hurdle than a man? And how did you deal with that? Because you seem like a really strong person. But I have to think that was a struggle like it was for everybody in that period of time.
Yeah, I didn't focus, looking back, I can see more of the challenges, but it was, I have 3 sons, a fabulous husband. I had a great father. I have 2 brothers. I've been surrounded by men all my life. So working in a denominational publishing house at the time, right, I was the first female, so this is early 80s, to have health insurance, because the other women working there were they expected would be under their, husbands. So it was kind of, okay, this is, I'm going to go pitch my case.
Did you have to ask for it?
Oh, I had to ask for it because my husband was still in college for that year.
Yeah.
So it was, I don't say it wasn't off-putting. It was just a challenge you learn. These are challenges. You have to develop confidence and you have to develop knowledge. Like you understand, you go in and pitch. And it's the same pitch as I had told my sons. If they're going in to ask for a raise or, they want to pitch an idea at their company, this is, here's how you can do that. Certainly on boards of directors was always, you could look around even still now. We've not, we've come some distance, but not near what we should as far as
15 to 18% of boards have women on them or something like that. And I'm always a little bit shocked about that. Now, I find myself to be, I'm a churchgoer. I read the Bible, all those things. And one of the verses in the Bible that talks about listen to your wife. She thinks differently.
Yeah.
And so that for me, that has a lot of different meanings.
Yeah.
It just means that women think differently and we should listen to them at some level, that they're going to offer something that I don't have, that's intuitive, or I don't have genetically, or whatever God's plan is in those individuals. So it's always interesting to hear from a woman's perspective, what they deal with on that level, as far as men listening, men taking wisdom from a woman in the leadership roles. And I'm assuming part of that is the reasons that you wrote the book. How do I get young women to realize they don't have to cower to whatever? They could have those ideas. And we talk a little bit about your book and what the premise behind that was.
I think part of the challenge, I just did last week, actually, one of my podcasts with Ann Carnathan came out, and it was on women on boards.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, she has a podcast. It's called Grit and Gravitas. So go check it out.
Yeah. Yes, do that.
I've watched a bunch of them, and they're very interesting. So,
but the challenge and the challenge really hasn't changed from what I've written in Women in High Gear. My message is to women: show up, go after the board you would like to serve on. If any of us are waiting to have someone knock on our door for an executive leadership position, it's not going to work that way. So, do some research and find a board you'd like to serve on that you feel you could add value and your skill set matches, and make the ask.
Yeah.
If you go on LinkedIn, it's very easy to find out what boards people serve on. So make some connections, and whether it's a bank board or a hospital board or a nonprofit, Salvation Army is near and dear to my heart, and we're always taking willing leaders.
So your general service that you provide to these brands? And there's a ton of these brands you've worked for, and I wrote down a bunch of them, but only if, there's, I don't know, 30 or 40 of them, but, locally, Mounts Jewelers, Duck Donuts, Salvation Army, Hallmark Channel, the Patriot News, Gannett Fleming. These are big organizations. And then I wrote down Ben Gallaher because he's a country music star.
That's a good brand. That's a passion and a purpose.
Super brand, I got to tell you.
Yeah,
that's awesome stuff. But in the brand storytelling, it seems to me that social media has really condensed messages to, sound bites. And it seems to me, and you can talk a little bit about how you've had to change your pattern of service to those people because of social media, and how you've kind of redesigned your service to them. Because, in our business, if I'm not on social media telling my story, my brand story, I'm going to be left behind because everybody else is.
Right.
Now, quite frankly,
it used to be the Yellow Pages.
Yes. You put that nice picture in the Yellow Pages, as big as you can get it, right? So tell me about how social media and all micro impressions, all of those things have affected your service over the last.
Well, it's tripled the, channels that we need to learn about and master. So back to the storytelling, you could go back to the parables. Stories are what really connect us and pull us in. So that hasn't changed from 2000 when I started. It's always digging deep in those first few meetings with the client or the corporation or the company, whether it's big or small, and finding out what is the story behind, why do they exist? Why are people showing up to work? What are the employees, passion and purpose? Yeah. Right. And really distilling that and then deciding, as a part of the strategy is what channels am I going to release that story on and how? What form would that take? Would it be long form like, I know that you're passionate about podcasts. Long form in my world would be opinion editorial. So that's like 800 words of what Terry Barr would say or Deeter Gallaher would say. And then we could distill it again down to X, or it's going to be on Facebook or Instagram story. So we've added the channels, which is multiplying the work.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, as you add those channels, you've got to hire the people that obviously know how to do all that stuff. And
then we have the analytics on par. So the public relations and marketing world has profoundly changed. When I started, there was no social media. So just think of the engine that created in the jobs, social media marketing manager. That didn't exist. We didn't even
I still have a hard time even realizing that's a true job, but it's, I can't do it myself.
Right. If you think, an entire bank can collapse based on a tweet, that your stock price on a publicly traded company, you could lose, millions of dollars from a Facebook post. That shows you the immense potential and responsibility we have as language artists. How are we going to frame that story? Because we have to be so diligent and careful. In the old days, we would be able to, when people would say, I'm going to stop the story, which is, go ahead and try that.
Possible now,
but now with the news cycle 24/7, there's no stopping a story. And you're lucky if you would even have a couple minutes or an hour in advance of a story.
Yeah.
So now we have Google alerts and all kinds of, expensive software alerts on everybody.
Well, it's right on your sign. And I like your tagline. It says powerful language and smart marketing. And I think that really, for me, that says use the right language, think about the right language, and then get it into people's laps as much as we can.
And see, there's no shortcut to that. So there might be a shortcut into where you're going to share your message. Like I said, it would be if it's on Twitter or X, that's a very condensed, or, you could do a YouTube video. There's a lot of tools out there, but you have to master the language. You have to be able to describe and make an emotional connection with your consumer, your client, your target audience, and that you need words to do that.
Absolutely. So you open this business, we'll call it Open It, but you jumped into this business with both feet, no floaties.
I swam to my ship.
Yeah, I swam to your ship, no floaties.
It did not come into harbor.
That's exactly right. And you had some success early on with your brother, and you got this, I guess you would call that what do you call what you did for your brother.
Brother-in-law, yes, brother-in-law.
Campaign.
So he was, yes, we did a campaign, and I worked with them for a couple years, and then moved out of the. So there, it was a church ministry, so that's a nonprofit. Yeah. Moved out of that into bigger clients. But another message to young people in leveraging your talents or skills or experience into the workforce. Mm-hmm. I never made an excuse for a 15-year gap on a resume, like, well, man, you graduated in, 81, and now you're just coming, you had a job from 81 to 86, 40-hour week job, and now you have a 15-year gap. I made no excuses for that, and was very confident saying, let me tell you what I did. And actually, if people can do that level of work for free, think of what they can do, if there is a salary and there's a financial incentive, attached to that. So I know a lot of people get worried, I've got a gap here, I've got a gap there, but if you can explain that, and you can use a great story with that and explain why that gap exists, that's not a barrier.
Yeah. So you get into the job, start building this business, you have this campaign at age 40, right out of the gate. How long, because it's grind to growth to greatness. How long did we grind over this idea and starting this business and really starting to see it flourish? When did you hit the spot where you go, I think I may make it? Because
I think I always thought I made it.
I like
looking back, I'm like, and again, you're the judge of whether you made it. If you have clients, you've made it.
Sure.
And so anyone who's starting a business, the market tells you if you made it or you didn't make it.
Yeah.
If you're not appropriately priced, you have no clients. So you reconfigure that. You go back to your original proposals, what's working. It doesn't really matter who the person on your right or left, what they're charging. It matters, can you get clients with what you're charging?
All right, we'll call it you skipped the grind part.
No, I didn't grind.
I like the mindset though. I've already made it. I just need to make it happen.
So 7 years I was at my home office.
Yeah.
So that's, that gives you an image. This is before, again, remote work.
Sure.
So, I'm meeting bigger clients as CEOs at Cornerstone Coffee House or different venues till I realized, okay, I think I need office space. Now I'm in your wheelhouse. So, real estate, I wasn't ready to buy. I think I looked at 7 different properties and ended up, at the nicest of all 7. Of course, my husband would say, of course you did. Yeah. That was a big shock that oh shoot, now this is real cash. Yeah. And that was, more money than our mortgage payment was. So I thought, now I'm affecting other people with these decisions. So I was there 7 years until I realized, well, wow, I've calculated all the money I spent on rent. And sometimes that's the absolute best option. That really was a sweet spot where I think, I've got a sign, I remember my father-in-law coming to visit me at the office and the sign says Deeter Gallaher Group, LLC. He said, oh, does that mean lots and lots of cash? I said, yeah, I'm going to go with that. Of course it does. But so go from there. And then 2014, bought my office. So that really was, I felt, buying a commercial space. You're like, wow, I think I made it. But again, go back to don't let someone else define whether you've made it or not. Yeah. If you had a short list of your goals, irrespective of revenue, and you're in business and clients are happy and you love what you do, you've made it.
Yeah, I like that because I know that in our business especially, and for those of you you should know by now, we've done 8 of these, I think. I'm in real estate, residential real estate with a little bit of commercial. In our business, there's always somebody that does better than I do.
Right.
There's always somebody that does less than I do. And so in business alone, if you're defining your success based upon somebody else's success, you're just going to spend your bills. You're going to be disappointed all the time. So I know from your history that when I saw your sign go up, I can distinctly remember when you bought your property. And I'm not sure why I remember that, but I was driving by and I saw your sign and I went, wow, yeah, that PR business must be okay. And I've met you lots of times.
Yeah.
Cornerstone, we've had lots of conversations, whatever. And I've always had a lot of respect for who you are. And you're a high gear, as your book says, you're a high gear woman. And you can see that in your quote unquote soft skills as you have high intensity and you've got some interesting soft skills there. But I can remember distinctly seeing your sign go up and go, wow, okay, she's making it. She's
and
there.
that probably was signing on the bottom line for owning that. And that whole process to commercial ownership is, I should write a book on that because I felt like there was no guide for me for that. But I really did think then, that was a larger statement of a degree of success. Like, where you put down roots sends a message too. Sure. Where your address is sends a message. And, there's like 12,000 cars a day on Market Street. So to your point, people could say, okay, Deeter Gallaher Group. Now, who are they? I've seen that sign a lot of times.
And I think you're recognizable too. I mean, people know you in Camp Hill.
Yeah.
So having a spot in Camp Hill makes a lot of sense there. So kind of fast forward a little bit, we'll call yourself successful. You've had a lot of different brands that you've been involved in, a whole list of them. At what point did you feel like you kind of tipped over into, I can show up on a daily basis and do my thing and I'm going to attract? I am literally hitting that. We call it greatness on this podcast, and greatness can be defined in a lot of ways. And you're always growing, you're always grinding. I understand that. But at what point did you go, oh gosh, I have a personal assistant. I've got a social media person. I have my own podcast. I have my own videographer. I feel like I've really
a whole team
tipped over. I call it tipping over into greatness. When did you feel that way? I know COVID must have been.
Yeah, COVID was, as clients were trying to figure that out, but actually there was a benefit, a more intensified service with crisis communications for us, because companies really had to get their message right. Is it safe to come into your, office? Is it safe for me to grocery shop? How am I going to? So clients and new clients leaned heavily on us for that. What is the right message we're going to put out there on social media or to employee emails or in our media releases or in our earnings report? How do we say that?
How did you navigate that? I mean, we got a lot of different messages from the media, from call it national media, where everybody's listening, everybody's watching, that's not everybody's scared to death. Am I going to get this? I'm going to die. And a lot of people did die. So, you have to take that into account. But how did you manage that message from a place where bring some civility and bring some calm to this? And let's put how did you do that?
Well, it's a good word you say, calm. And civility didn't quite come into the messaging we were doing, because it was more, how do you do business with us in these? So I'm speaking on behalf of the clients. The clients needed to get their message out. How can you do business with us, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's hospitality industry, banking, and financial services? So they're putting up plastic barriers or they're doing drive-throughs. And those are, I don't want to say, the messages, you had to be honest, you had to be transparent. You had to make sure your customers or consumers knew that you were coming from a place of goodwill, that you would do nothing that would jeopardize their health. So if it's a grocery store, that the elderly are going to have their own time to come in. So those types of messages, the same message I would want to tell, my grandmother, the way we would couch that. So COVID was, as long as we have internet, it didn't affect our business that way. It wasn't like we had to change our, I could still go into our office, but it was just a new learning curve for all of us. And we're not the same since then. The emphasis people have on how they do business and whether corporations are still trying to get their workforce back, and their younger people don't necessarily want to come back to the office.
Yeah. And I think there's a generation of young people, and call it 2 or 3 years of working experience. It goes, oh, well, I didn't have to work during that period of time. That's my experience with work. So why do I have to do that now?
Right.
And that's becoming an issue for employers as well.
So back to your question was, what was my tipping point, or when did I think I made it? So in our small little army, kind of my brand is high gear.
Sure.
And so whether it's women in high gear, students in high gear, about every week we spend a Friday and say, okay, where were the big wins? And we do have setbacks. That was one of your questions. We have a lot of those. I feel like you're not really going to thrive if you don't get comfortable with some setbacks,
Well, the fact that you jumped into something that you weren't sure of to start with.
Right. I had setbacks on that too. But some of our high gear, I had a full spread for a client in the Wall Street Journal. So that was just a huge, in my world and our industry, that is a huge get. Yeah. That's a huge level of persuasion and pitching and finding the right story to that. I've had 2 letters to the editor in the Wall Street Journal. So that's how I measure the wins. Like where did we succeed on behalf of the clients and where are they thriving?
This episode of Grind to Growth to Greatness is brought to you by Terry Barr, Distinctive Real Estate, advising families across Pennsylvania and Northern Virginia for over 15 years. Visit the website at terrybarrealestate.com.
I also know you have another book. It's called The Future Belongs to Students in High Gear. And I'm assuming that's obviously it's generally based on this, on the woman in high gear. But tell me what's your main message to young people? If they can't buy your book at the moment, what's the main message to our young people that are just starting out, coming out of school, whether it's high school or college? What's your message to them?
So my message, similar to women in high gear, was to shorten their learning curve. We would see in all of my leadership positions, and even at Deeter Gallaher Group, if I've had a fair amount of college interns, and they would come into the office, and there tended to be a disconnect with what we think we want, and what they're coming from college with, the skills, like whether they needed more work on the soft skills, whether they need to put their device down and understand just what I thought was basic information about an interview or a meeting. There was a disconnect there. Right. So I thought if they can learn this stuff on the front end before they're finished college, and even deciding on career choice, like if you're choosing a major, say it's art history, well, there's only so many museums in the United States. So, and that's certainly a noble and lofty passion, but all that money that you're spending, and you will have to theoretically pay back. Where is that a good use? Yeah. Did you need guidance early on? Like how maybe you could do that as a passion, and where could you make a profit? Like for Benjamin in the music industry, if you're only going to play for free, that's not a business. Yeah. That's a hobby.
Yeah, just for those that, I think we mentioned this. She has a son that's literally in the country music business, and I'm assuming. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that's one of the reasons you moved to Nashville.
That was my first introduction to doing any business in Nashville. Yeah. Yes, that is still, we still have some foothold there, but more of our business is up here in Pennsylvania.
But Ben he's very talented writer,
songwriter, and performer.
Yeah, even has a contract. Yes. Was it Sony?
No, he's got a different label now.
Different label, okay.
And so, it's a publishing contract and a label contract.
Amazing. So. Fantastic. Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you how your husband fits into this, because
I think you're the first one that's ever asked me that.
His name's Corey, and you said he was a high school sweetheart, and you've told me your journey, and every bit of your journey, in a lot of ways, in my opinion, is kind of dependent on him going, honey, go get him.
Well, you're very correct.
Okay.
And I'll step back and say I couldn't have done any of this without him, because he was he was a high school chemistry teacher for 35 years. So, a solid and dependable, which allowed me to figure out my own business journey. So if I was a sole breadwinner, which is a lot of the case for women, then you really have no time to figure it out. You have to reach profitability really quickly. So thanks to him, I could take my time and figure it out because the mortgage was still going to be paid. Yeah, he's always been my biggest champion and supporter, not on social media. He's in many ways, we're polar opposites.
Well, darn it. I tell you, I when I was doing my research on you, I got all 3 of your sons' names. I got your dad's name, your mom's name, your brother's name, but I couldn't find your husband's name.
You couldn't find him anywhere. No, he's a biggest supporter. So I've not done any of this alone. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I want to thank you for coming in. I do have one other question for you, and that is, are you reading any books right now? And if you are, what are you reading? A high gear woman, what do you read?
Oh, gosh. I read a lot of articles, a lot of marketing books. I read the Wall Street Journal every single day, which is kind of I've done that for 25 years. And it's where I get a lot of my resources and quotes and trends from. Yeah. So I'm trying to think what book is on my
well, that's okay.
desk now. I can't name one off the top of my head. I'm trying to figure out my topic for my own third book to write. Yeah. So I didn't nail that down either.
Well, I didn't know what to expect if your book was going to be directed, at women, or what's the magic sauce for the female in the business world. And I had no idea. And I have to tell you, I started last night. I had another podcast with someone else, and I had about an hour and a half to wait. And I was here right in the seat. And I read about 30 pages. What an awesome book. You could just get a lot of insight into the business world, a lot of insight into what's, in particular, soft skills is something that,
I'm sure you see that in your relationship business.
Sure.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, my relationship skills sometimes are not as good as they should be. And that's funny coming from a sales guy. But that's something I always look for. I look for that encouragement and how to do that, how to progress in that skill of mine. But I want to thank you for coming on our podcast. It's been a pleasure. I know that we put this in the middle of your day, so this was a hard get for you, and I appreciate you doing that. We just had a snowstorm, so
yes, we did.
I'm sure that threw a little wrench in, but I want to thank you for coming in on this.
Terry, thank you, and best of luck. This podcast is going to help a lot of people that your whole journey you're on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, thanks for tuning in to Grind to Growth to Greatness. Tune in next week to our next episode. I have a great guest, and I'm excited to introduce him to you. But until then, subscribe and like. Talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Grind to Growth to Greatness podcast. Our passion is to talk to the brightest entrepreneurs, CEOs, creators, athletes, anyone who's made it, and dive into their struggles, their successes, and their secrets. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Grind to Growth to Greatness. See you next time.